According to the latest BankservAfrica Disposable Salary Index, South Africans' average salary growth has declined slightly in September. This is the MoneyMakers, or the slightly smaller MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight I'll look at the reasons why this is the case and how you should be planning your finances accordingly. Joining me, Mike Schüssler, the chief economist and founder of economists.co.za, and David Crossley, who's practice manager at BDO Wealth Advisers. Give us the bad news, Mr. Schüssler.
Well, I don't think it's that much of a bad news. I think we've got two indices that are really nice. The one is, say, a take-home pay, or the BankservAfrica Disposable Salary Index. That's near 13,000. It fell 120, but that's more from smoothing rather than anything, because it was back payments to civil servants in the previous months, and that's coming out of the system. But we're still 6.5% above what it was a year ago. It's still beating inflation. And overall, I think the people in the private sector, or not the private, in the formal sector, are doing very, very well, Bruce. The other part that we look at is has been doing very well as well as the pension payments, private pension payments. So people who've saved and now are drawing down that money. And that's increased quite tremendously, with about 10% or so. And ultimately, it's the 10th month in a row that private pensions have beaten salaries in increases. But having said that, private pensions are still around about 45%. The comma points vary, but around about 45% that of the take-home salaries.
So on average, if a take-home salary, your number is 10,000 Rand or thereabouts, a pension is about 4,500 Rand, a private sector pension or thereabouts. It's not a lot of money, is it?
No, it's not just it's a private pension, so it includes also government employees are on pension. It's when you save for it personally. It is not a lot of money. People don't realize, but the median pension in South Africa is just under 4,000 Rand. The average pension is near 6,000 Rand. The median salary is near 10,000, and the average pension is near salary is near 13,000 Rand. Sorry, I'm now getting my own confusion.
It's a lot of numbers. But in that, South Africans, we might not be dramatically worse off, but we're not dramatically better off. At best, we're flatlining. Is that a fair comment?
I would say we're still better off this year, because one big factor that we keep forgetting is that the oil price fell, petrol prices declined, it kept inflation below 5% for most of the year, and salaries have been increasing at that 6% plus level, and the good performance of the markets overall in the last 3 or 4 years since the Great Recession has allowed trustees of pension funds to put more money towards pensioners, and that's why they're doing a lot better this year.
David, just before we went on air, you and I were talking this evening about the fact that if you fly across the country, out of Cape Town, you can see the beaches on the dams as the water levels are dropping there. Certainly there's an issue with water from Lesotho at the moment. The grain producing areas have not got the rain they need to start ploughing and to start preparing the land for springtime plantings. Maize plantings this year are going to be down dramatically. That all points toward something of a food shortage into 2016, which has got massive political ramifications, but for the market that Mike Schüssler is talking about, it's got massive inflationary implications too.
I think that is part of the problem. What generally happens, and we've spoken about this before, is that the first thing to go is a family or an individual's need to save. They say, I want to maintain the DSTV and I want to maintain my standard of living, notwithstanding the fact I may have less disposable income and the price of food has risen, and therefore I will sacrifice what in fact is the most important. And we deal with almost two things at BDO. The one is with pensioners who are running out of money before they run out of life. And that is a serious problem. And the other is with the other end of the scale, where people who are still to retire in 10, 15, 20, 30 years' time are just not giving the attention that is deserved to whatever dwindling savings they're doing, and they're abandoning that first. And I think that's the dilemma that people are faced with. And in the face of something like that, you've seriously got to cut your coat according to your cloth on things that you don't need to spend money on for things that you need to save for in the future.
Yeah, and it's an increasingly hard task, is it not, Mike Schüssler? Because as an economist, you see our worst habits exposed on a regular basis. The stuff we choose to spend money on, as opposed to the stuff we we need to spend money on?
Yeah, I think, I agree that people don't save enough. But, that's the other thing, is that we have a very good pension pot in this country. We have the 6th highest as a percentage of pension fund assets to GDP in the world. And we have the 8th highest in nominal dollar terms, Bruce. So it is a big pot.
Is that pot skewed in the same way as the economy is skewed?
It's probably
in that?
as skewed, but it's probably not quite as skewed in the sense that most people in the formal sector have been saving, whereas those in the informal sector have not been saving. But the people that he's talking about are now, because of the previous years of high inflation and so on, people are not perhaps saving as much, so it's not growing as much as it used to be. And I think we're lucky to come from that high level. The problem is adding to it might be now under pressure. And that is, as he says, the first thing that is cut in hard economic times. This year, despite the economy slowing down and everything, I think the consumer out there has been lucky. Yes, car sales have dropped, but look at retail sales. Yeah. They're up 3 to 4% every month on a year-ago basis. I look at aeroplanes. You look at the passenger numbers to the smaller airports, it's all increased dramatically because of cheaper flights, and cheaper flights are possible via competition and obviously low oil prices. And I think that says to me that people have spent their money elsewhere. But the big ticket items, people are still scared because they're not so sure of the future. Yeah. But I think we've done okay this year, with the consumer has, and the salaries have not, there's only 1 month, that we have not beaten inflation this year. So ultimately, I think the salaries have been doing a lot better than I would have expected. But as I said before, half of that was because of the low oil price. Yeah. We don't get the same thing next year. We hear the Reserve Bank and everybody talking of an inflation going near 7%. We hear and we see the effects of the drought. We can feel the heat wave, so to speak. And we know that in future, food prices are going to go up, and therefore oil prices are not going down, or not therefore, but oil prices are probably not going down as much again. So your inflation rate rises.
And David, I mean, this puts families between a rock and another rock.
Absolutely, you've got to eat.
Yes.
But whilst I hear what Mike says, whilst the people who are in corporate employment are probably relatively secure in terms of corporate benefits, there are an awful lot more people working in companies that do not have corporate benefits. Yeah. And that percentage is increasing all the time. And my concern is with those people who have to provide for themselves and do not have that corporate pension life belt are not. Yeah. And that's the key, and that is where the sacrifices have to be made on things like retail spending, where you make the trousers last another year. Yeah. You make the car last another year, and you concentrate on spending that disposable income on food because you have to, and you try and maintain a portion or an element of the money that you're saving for something that is inevitably going to happen. And you do not adopt the ostrich syndrome in doing that. That's the key. And
also, do we not live in a bit of a fool's paradise, Mike Schüssler? Because here we sit in South Africa, where globally, and pick a currency, pick a pound, pick a euro, pick a dollar, actually we're probably a lot worse off than we were 5 years ago, courtesy of rand depreciation. Oh,
well, yes, in international terms, we're quite clearly a lot worse off. I think if we look at the trade weighted rand, in 5 years we've halved. Yeah. And, that gives you pretty much a good idea as to how that is. And in real terms, it's probably only down 30%, but we are worse off in that sense. Yet our prices on certain products haven't gone up that much. I think the supermarkets and everybody in the supply chain are trying to stop, because they know once that gets going, then their own livelihoods may be at stake. But I think it's getting to the point where the profit margin in the South African economy is now under 6%. Your return on assets is under 6%, let me put it that way, not the profit margin. And when your return on assets gets so low that you can put money in the bank and get the same return without all the risk and with sun, it becomes dangerous. And
why is it dangerous? Why is it dangerous?
Well, first of all, it's not good for informing companies, entrepreneurship, all that type of stuff, and therefore jobs, infrastructure, everything that goes along with that. But the other thing where it becomes dangerous is that the next thing that they cut is the employed. Yeah. And you can see it. I mean, in 2013, we've now got those figures. We could see that the platinum mines return on assets was already negative 3%. in 2014 it's going to be negative, and we know it's going to be negative in 2015. So after a while, in that sort of thing, you know that they are they're either selling it or they're getting out of it. And ultimately, that means employment losses.
And all of this sort of feeds then into markets that don't do anything particularly interesting, and it almost removes the incentive to invest and to save. David, it's a vicious circle where people look at markets and say, well, markets aren't doing anything. I can put money into the bank risk-free. Why should I risk my capital in the markets? Also, trade unions want a slice, and taxes are going up and capital gains. I couldn't be bothered with this. I'm going to live for now.
Yeah, but you see, that's all very well. And in fact, we're in a strange situation in this country, is that when we have these vast disasters that come up, like student riots and things like that, the stock market goes crazy.
Those weren't disasters. No, they were just a little bit of agitation.
Absolutely, but the stock market still went crazy. So people are thinking, well, that's great, everything's fine. But people who only have a very, very small amount of money that they can afford to save have really very little choice but to go to the banks, because so many of the institutions put minimum levels of monthly investment amounts into their requirements. So that is another problem. So they may have to resort to the bank. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter where you put it, just put it. Just put it. Don't abandon it and go off to the mall and drown your sorrows, because ultimately you will pay a very heavy price for that.
If we look at the market, so in South Africa, 70% of the turnover right now of the top 60 companies on the JSE comes from outside our borders. So when there is a riot, and that riot has an impact on the rand, for argument's sake, I'm not saying it did, then the market can go crazy, because it's repricing itself in dollars, euros and yen.
And thank goodness it is.
Yes, absolutely. But that's another thing. When the market has already done that, now we're going to see the smaller firms starting to do that, because the profit margins aren't here. And that's the other dangerous thing, is that the firms become less South African. And they may still stay listed here, but
what happens to the real economy?
What happens to me and you in a job?
Yeah.
And that is the problem. I think we've overstepped the mark, and we've thrashed business with all sorts of slogans, and ultimately business is pulling back and saying, yes, no, I agree, I'll give you another loan, and I'll give you another bursary, and here's a bit of tax money.
And
but
I'm out the back door.
I'm just speaking to the Reserve Bank about another 500 million that I'm going to be investing in Africa, and from there I'm talking to the African governments and saying I'm going to take some of my money out there and put it into Europe as well, and that's literally what's happened.
It's the brutal reality of what we face right now.
Approach.
It is. It's absolutely cold-blooded, but it's a question of survival too. That was Mike Schüssler, Chief Economist and founder at economist.co.za, and David Crossley, the practice manager at BDO Wealth Advisers. Thank you for watching. More Moneymakers tomorrow. Till then, good night.